I'm Dr. Ray Middleton. I help people by delivering great training. Here's an example of an episode from one of my training courses. So depending on the role and service we're in, we will have some limited resources to help with the transition process. This change of environment should be someone transitioning from an institution, it could be, or a prison, or a general hospital. There's lots of these transitions we're thinking about. You might support someone coming out of a psychiatric hospital, back into the community. Or the transition, the change of environment could be someone moving from rough sleeping on the streets without a home into supported accommodation with a home. There's lots of these examples of transitions. However, this principle can be applied to any transition, such as helping someone engage with a new service or into work. The first transition we support for the person, we're trying to support this transition, is to accept our own presence as a worker, offering them some support. You see how that's a very subtle transition to encourage them to accept our presence, our help, our enter their world, and that's a transition. We need to desensitize people to our presence in the early engagement phase. The process we might go to, where the person is. We might approach with an offer of some general need item, if that's appropriate to our role, like clothes or food, or we might be saying, there's a drop in here, we can have some toast or a shower, depending on what role you're in. We might respect their personal space and not overstay our welcome as a strategy, because we're trying to break the ice and we're trying to help them transition to accept us in their world to start with. There'll be other transitions later on. We might define our role in a relaxed, conversational way, but we're still defining our role, so as not to overpromise what we can do. We do want to communicate what we could potentially help them with on their journey through life, but we don't want to overpromise and then break the trust, because we want to be realistic about what we can offer. At the same time, we're listening to their use of language, their personal story or narrative. What they need and want will start to come up in the conversation, and we're listening carefully to the phrases and language that they use, so that we can frame our offering of help in a way that really connects and resonates with the client's world, their language use, their values and their narrative. So we're listening carefully and we're trying to engage with their world, which is a linguistic world as well as a physical world. The aim is to support their sense of control and autonomy, whilst also supporting this transition. A transition can also be a new idea or a concept, as I mentioned earlier, so think about that. It could be the idea of recovery, and they're transitioning into this idea. Or it could be the idea of getting a job is possible after many years of unemployment. So sometimes we're helping people transition and see themselves in these new concepts or ideas. It's not just about transitioning into a new accommodation, for example. We may develop a bridging language. We'll talk about that a bit later on. That's discussed in the common language construction principle of pretreatment. So we might have this bridging language to help them transition into this new world. Finding a common language to talk about a new idea or concept is a way to explore and introduce potential resources and services in a language that's acceptable and understandable to the person that we're getting alongside and offering to help. So we're trying to find that language that's mutually acceptable, understandable. When we're developing some initial goals to work on together, in the contracting phase, what Jay calls the contracting phase, say, well, if we're going to work together at something, what are the goals that we're aiming at? These goals often naturally involve a transition process. So these things all link together. Because the goal is often then, well, I'd like to enter this new world, transition into this other world because of the goal that I want to achieve. It might be a house, it might be work, it might be not being lonely and joining some hobby groups, an allotment, anything like that. But do you see how the goal often links to a transition into a new world of ideas or physical environment? We might support the transition in lots of practical ways. For example, we might accompany people to important appointments, or we might go with them to an initial visit to somewhere, a potential new environment. We might encourage and strengthen their already existing skills about being able to cope in this new environment, because we're taking a strengths-based approach, remember. in our conversations around this transition. We could role play with someone about how an interview might go around potential new housing or a work interview. So if that's appropriate, these are all skills and strategies for helping someone transition. We might reflect with someone about what's worked well and what hasn't worked so well in the past for them in terms of strategies about transitioning into new environments. And then people can learn from that and think, well, that didn't really work last time, or this seemed to work. Through reflecting and talking, we may help someone gain a reasonable and realistic perspective on the new environment that they're entering. And this might involve us explaining how things are likely to work in this new environment, what roles people might have that they come across. We're helping to manage their expectations, which makes it more likely to work as a successful transition where people adapt and find that balance. Developing new skills or strengthening a way of coping that someone has already can help people adapt and find this balance and equilibrium in their new environment. But a different approach could be to add support around them to make it more likely to be a successful transition. Here, Jay draws on the writings around psychosocial rehabilitation strategies. This approach is strengths-based and person-centered. It focuses on developing conversations about people's goals. And when we think together with the person we're helping to transition and describe what goals there are, we also then describe what barriers there might be to achieving these goals. How these barriers might be overcome is then brought into the conversation and considered. And perhaps increasing the support around someone, helping them connect to a wider social network of support, could be one of the ways to overcome these barriers to achieving these goals and successfully entering a new social environment. It might be extra support as well as skills that they may develop themselves and strategies for successfully adapting and finding that equilibrium in that new environment. I hope you found that helpful. For more information about the training I can offer, email me at ray.middleton@ladderforlife.com or sign up for one of my free trauma-informed courses by clicking the link in the comments. Like and subscribe for more helpful videos, or post a question in the comments and I'll reply.